about the. But
No.
it's very interesting movie. I watched it last night. Very interesting with regard to this knowledge of your death and how humans, go from denial to.
How can we make
freak
money
out.
out of it?
Anyways, interesting movie in terms of afflictions.
Okay, so we have a interesting, hopefully interesting, something different to cover today. So we'll just get right to the prayers and then get into it.
Anyway, it's on Netflix. It's kind of interesting. You might enjoy it.
Okay, check it out.
I don't know if it's actually enjoyable, but it is.
Well, it's interesting.
Yeah, it's
Well,
interesting.
I mean,
It's like a commentary on where we're at as a society.
on humans.
Yeah.
But it doesn't end in it. Ends. It's showing the difference between how different humans deal with reality differently.
Okay. Now, back to the Dharma. Taking refuge and generating bodhicitta. We'll just go through these so we can get to the.
Well,
Hey, Merritt.
Barrett.
So happy to be here.
Sit in the chair. It's a beautiful day for Barrett to arrive and shine her view.
Okay, here we go. Ready or not? Sangye chadang soki chognam la jangchu bardu dakni kyapsu chi daki jinso gipe sonam ki rola penchir sangye druparshu sangye chadang soki chognam la Jangchu bardu dagni gyapsu puchi dagi jinso gibe sonam drola penchir sangye drupa sangye chadang suki chodnam la Jangchu bardu dagni gyapsu puchi Dagni jinso ipe sonam rola penchir sangye drupa. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. And now to the 7-limb prayer, and just visualize your gurus and Buddhas and all the Bodhisattvas and all your spiritual teachers in the space in front of you. Reverently, I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind, and present clouds of every type of offering, actual and mentally transformed. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time, and rejoice in the merits of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until samsara ends, turn the wheel of dharma for sentient beings. I dedicate the merit created by myself and others to the great enlightenment. And then the mandala after. Sajipaki jukshime tu Ramri Ramlingji Nidegen Pagi Sangi Jindu Mide Urwami Daching Idam Guru Radna Mandala Kamya. And then we have the essence of causation mantra and the fifth.
Brian, you have your ear things in, but it's coming out.
I know, I'm trying to get it to change.
Yeah, Brian, you're speaking.
Change is possible.
And probable.
And probable, right?
Exactly.
And definite. Okay, let's see. Ye Dharma Hetu, the Sanskrit mantra about causation. Om Ye Dharma Hetu Prabhava Hetu Tesham Tatagato Yavada Tesham Chayo Niroda Evam Mahimaha Shramanama Swa. And then stanza 5 from the 18th chapter of Nagarjuna's Fundamental Wisdom of the Middle Way. By extinguishing actions and afflictions, there is liberation. Actions and afflictions arise from misconceptions, and misconceptions arise from elaborations. Elaborations will cease through cultivating emptiness. Oh. You loving the weather? I'm loving the weather.
You know, then you realize what we went through.
Yeah, it was pretty stressful.
Oh,
Yeah, I know.
that all just happened.
Yeah. Okay.
We really felt it because not only us, but all the animals. It was just
I
a
know.
daily grind,
Mm.
and the plants and the trees and everything, trying to keep everything alive.
I know.
Oh,
Okay.
Hello.
hello, guys. So, this first introduction, we'll do a very quick review of what we covered last week, but I wanted to say that all of the Buddha's teachings are to be taken as personal advice to us, each one, individually. So in the second part of this section of the wisdom chapter, it's expressly addressing what is called the selflessness of persons. And Shantideva presents here a refutation of two Hindu theories of the self and challenges arguments and objections that they make against the Prasangika middle way. It's important to remember that the reason Shantideva is doing this and having these arguments and debates is not merely to engage in some kind of intellectual discussion to prove who's correct and who's incorrect. These debates that he's engaging in and showing us go to the very heart of what causes our suffering, and the ignorance that's at the root of it. So Shantideva is not talking simply about ignorance and suffering in general. He's talking about our ignorance and suffering and how it affects us. This is why these debates, although they may seem like something we don't know about and not interested, they're very pertinent to our current situation that we're in, if we can view it in that context. So they're as relevant to us living in the world right now as they were to Shantideva and the people living in the 8th century. Nothing really has changed in terms of suffering and ignorance and what causes it. So in the last session, we talked about two ways that a mind can become deluded. There's what's called innate delusions, and this is what we talked about last week. Innate delusions are we don't even have to be trained in this. When we're born, it's as if we come right out and we think everything exists the way it appears to us, separately, independently, discrete. So then we feel that we are separated off from everything else. And this gives rise to this delusion of the ego. So we have this sense that we have a me, an ego, an I, that is separate from everything else, and that it's alone, and it's needy. It needs things. So what happens is we start to look out at the world we see and the people we see, and we begin to crave and desire and get attached to things, whether it's people or things or whatever. And this develops what the thing that we call attachment is this ego feeling that it's needy and has to get something. And so we develop craving in relationships. We want somebody to fulfill a need that we have or that we think we want, or in our jobs, we want it to fulfill a need or what we want, and we get very driven by this. The older we get and the more we get into the world and our career and our families, it becomes very hard to see through this attachment we have. And we often confuse love with attachment. And the way we can easily see where we're at on that spectrum of attachment and love, according to Buddhism, is may you be happy. Attachment is I can't live without you. I need you. I want you. I'll die if something happens to you. So as a parent, as a person in a relationship with a spouse or a child or someone who's close to them, we know both of these are mixed into the relationship. And so in order for us to be very clear about what part of that relationship is attachment and what part of it is love, we need to remember those definitions. Attachment is, this is craving, grasping, and love is may you be happy. And that's we can see where we're at. We can see how difficult the grasping is. And as we talked about last week, also when something gets in the way of what this ego self thinks it needs or wants, and something stands in the way of that, then this whole other thing, this whole other form called aversion. You have attachment and then you have aversion. This aversion arises when something gets in the way, a thing or a person stands in the way of what we think we want and need. Aversion arises in the form of frustration, jealousy, anger, hatred, goes to fear, goes to attack, and then it can then get into other forms of aversion, because to make matters worse, we through our own negative actions of body, speech, and mind, our own negative actions, we then can develop a sense of shame and guilt and depression. So we're turning our anger, that aversion into ourselves. So that it's just a mess that we can find ourselves in. And we all know this, we've all experienced it. Yeah.
I'm going to just add a distinction or a factor to do with the difference between love and attachment. Love is something that is coming, it's interior generated, it's coming from within your consciousness, as a wish that a sentient being have happiness. So it's coming from you and sort of going out. Attachment is seeking affirmation, gratification, satisfaction, confirmation from external things. In other words, it's attachment when the behavior of somebody affects you, because you have become externally oriented. You think that your happiness is coming from
out there, right?
External.
Right.
So that's a really big factor that we have to always be aware of, is this internal orientation, watching your mind, taking responsibility for what comes from your mind through your actions of body, speech, and mind, as opposed to what you're trying to get from your external environment, which ultimately will be nothing. You're not looking for anything from your external environment.
It's that neediness that we're thinking we're getting.
No person, no place, no politician, no beautiful day, no nothing. Right. Is where the source of your lasting happiness.
So as we discussed last week, this ego self-grasping is the cause of all our afflictive emotions. And those afflictive emotions, and the root of all of this is the ignorance, thinking that everything exists separately and independently. And that is that ego self-grasping. And what causes it is the root of all the suffering that exists in samsara. So that ego self-grasping is the thing that obscures what are called our afflictive, creates what are called afflictive obscurations, which are when we have afflictive obscurations, we're not able to be liberated from this cycle of samsaric existence. And by getting rid of these afflictive obscurations, we can be rid of or freed from cyclic existence. Then today, what we're getting into is what we called last week intellectually formed delusions. And these intellectually formed delusions will arise in us due to views of the self that are not instinctive to us, but we have been influenced by. So this could come through, we're all familiar with this too. This can come through things like various philosophies or religions or materialistic kinds of views. What else did I list there? There's things that were, psychological, non-religious. I mean, all kinds of what we would think of being kind of authoritative views of how things are. Then they sort of intellectually affect us, and we make for ourselves a view of how things exist. And we're all really actually quite familiar with this. This is what Shantideva is talking about in this particular part of the chapter. According to the Buddha, any kind of self that appears to the mind as if it exists independently does not exist at all. So that any kind of self that appears to the mind as if it exists independently does not exist at all. So when we're looking at all these intellectually formed views of how things, how the reality of the self exists, we need to keep this in the back of our mind. Any self that appears to the mind as if it exists independently does not exist at all. So in the following debates, and this applies to any self, ours and any other self that any other kind of self that we may kind of reify and say that self exists permanently, And we have views like this. And it's important for us to look at it and to see where that is in our own mind, how we're thinking about that. So that's why this debate that he's going to have, this is the context for us to see it in. It took me a long time to get there, because as you will see, and I'm relying on all of you to insert some lively discussion into this, because I've been working on this one for weeks, as Kavita can attest to it, and going, I don't know how to, this is like, it's information that I didn't know before. It's not Buddhism information, but in order to understand what he's talking about, I had to really research it. So it was like, opening up a whole new way of looking at things. And it reminds me a little bit of like a lecture you might hear at a university in a big lecture hall, and you're just going, so let's, hope we can not have that happen.
Kudos to you for taking the time to understand a whole philosophical view that has ultimately been shown to be incorrect. Not everybody would spend so much time.
The thing is about it though, but the thing is that I recognize some of my own sort of beliefs I may have picked up along the way. I mean, I have not studied Hinduism, but a lot of the things I've been exposed to, and people I've been exposed to, they have studied Hinduism, and it comes into the whole view, and you sort of just and it matches other kinds of religions, and we all then put it together and say, oh, this must be what it is, And remember, any self that appears to the mind as if it exists independently does not exist at all. This is the thing that the Buddha said, and that we need to remember here. So what we're talking about is called the Samkhya school of Hindu philosophy. Have you ever heard of Samkhya? Yeah, so you studied yoga though.
Yeah,
Some of that,
so a lot is familiar, but but I'm not a scholar.
Yeah.
but
Neither am I.
Yeah.
But Wikipedia is. So, and I poured over it, so I hopefully I have some sense of it.
What will you say the term again?
Samkhya, and it transliterates as Samkhya, the Samkhya school of Hindu philosophy. And so this is what the theory that of the self that Shantideva is refuting here. So Samkhya and here we go, this is Wikipedia. Samkhya is one of the oldest orthodox schools of Hindu philosophy that evolved from its earliest forms in the 8th and 7th century BCE to its development as a classical school of Indian philosophy during the 1st through the 10th centuries CE. So that puts it right in the period of time that Shantideva was active, the 8th century. So Shantideva, being at Nalanda in northwest India, would have been very familiar with this Samkhya philosophy. This is why it's in his Way of the Bodhisattva. He's debating this Samkhya philosophy. So I don't know what that would be like to us. I would suppose it would be similar to if a Buddhist was very familiar with Christian philosophy and was sort of debating back and forth, you know, the different points of between Buddhism and Christian philosophy. This is what Shantideva is doing here with the Samkhyas. Samkhya is a Sanskrit word that means to systematically enumerate, calculate, deliberate, and reason through rational examination. So you can see this had this kind of reasoning and deliberating. You can see that exists in Buddhism. The Samkhya, that aspect of the Samkhya philosophy or practice had an influence on Buddhism, as well as Jainism, which both Buddhism and Jainism are considered unorthodox schools, Indians philosophy schools. So the Samkhyas assert the existence of what they call Atman, and many of us may have heard of this term, Atman. That's a Sanskrit word for the true or eternal self, the self-existent essence, of each individual is Atman. According to them, and it exists in every living being, and that this true eternal self is distinct and separate from the ever evolving embodied individual who is embedded in material reality in samsara. So this is not the same at all, but it is similar to what the concept that we may have grown up with as in a Judeo-Christian context as the soul. Similar, it's not the same, but it's similar. It's like the soul sort of is not, affected by, the soul is a thing that goes on and on from life to lifetime, and it exists. It exists. This is the way we look at it. Atman is this way, but Atman is,
separate.
separate.
It's like soul is kind of with you. And
Yeah, when we go soul, we go right here. It's in my soul. So soul would be very similar, maybe to the Buddhism talks about this very, very, very subtle. They call it an indestructible drop, but what it is, it's very, very subtle energy combined with consciousness. And that subtle energy is the thing that carries all of our habitual propensities from lifetime to lifetime. And so when we go, my soul, it would be as if we're talking about that mental continuum that goes from lifetime to lifetime in the Buddhist context. But Buddhist doesn't talk about soul, doesn't talk about it in independently self-existing anything, actually. The Orthodox schools of Hinduism believe that Atman exists in every living being, and that this true eternal self is distinct and separate from the ever-evolving embodied individual who is embedded in material reality. This is a major point of difference with the Buddhist doctrine of selflessness, which holds that there is no unchanging true essence or self to be found anywhere in the collection of aggregates that make up the entirety of a person's experience of their existence. The aggregates, what they're talking about is, in Buddhism, is form, sensory feeling or sensations, discrimination, mental formations, which is the mental continuum, and awareness, which is consciousness. And this is our experience. And they're saying there's nothing other than what our experience is. There is no something else, that exists independently of that. And it's not some unchanging thing. So, for the Samkhya Hindus, Atman serves as an individualized example of the universal consciousness called Purusha. So here's where some of us may have heard of this idea of cosmic consciousness. And this comes from kind of a Hindu point of view, that there is a universal cosmic consciousness out there that is completely separate somehow, and it's permanent. The way the Hindus view it, it's permanent. So the Atman is an individualized aspect of this. It is permanent and unchanging, uncaused, but is present everywhere. What it's referring to is an awareness that observes or witnesses, observes or witnesses consciousness. Let me just go back. It's an observing or witnessing consciousness, which is described as unattached and unrelated to anything. It is permanent, independent, eternal, and pure. All the objects that are perceived by this permanent Atman, or this Purusha, this witnessing consciousness, all of these objects that it perceives arises from a primal substance, which they call the first cause. Now some of us who are familiar with Big Bang and all that would go, oh, first cause. They're talking about first cause. They are talking about first cause. They're saying there's a primal substance that's called the first cause, and everything that's not Purusha, that's not Atman, that's not cosmic consciousness, arises from this first cause. So everything, meaning all form, physical form, matter, egos, morality, conceptuality, all of these kinds of things that we would say is, we are very familiar in the world. Emotions, things like that, all come from this first cause, and they name that Prakriti. Yeah. Don't worry about the words, just that, that it's the first cause. It forms all the cognitive, moral, psychological, egoistic, emotional, sensorial, physical, and material aspects of reality, which are impermanent. So Atman and Purusha, Atman, the cosmic consciousness and the individualized version of the cosmic consciousness, which is in every individual, are permanent. And all of everything that arises from this first cause is impermanent and includes all of this ego and emotion and all this kind of stuff. Are you with me?
I think so. And then the permanence is what? The beginningless and endless time.
Yeah, permanent. Well, now and then we're going to get into that. We're going to get into, we need to be very, very clear in how we define things.
I was going to nitpick. You need to keep repeating that this is what they believe.
Yeah, this is what the Samkhyas believe. We're talking about.
You have to keep repeating it in almost every sentence.
Okay.
Because we're apt to hear you say something and then start thinking we're supposed to understand it and believe it. So please keep.
We're only learning about Samkhya so we can put this debate into context.
I'm just telling you.
Yeah.
I know, and I keep doing it, and I'm sure everybody else is too.
Right. Okay.
I'm pretty typical.
We're talking about Samkhya here. I'll let you know.
You say they mistakenly believe, according to them. You just keep reminding.
I'm just according to them. Okay. All right. So the Samkhyas call the primal substance Prakriti, like I said. The Samkhyas say that Atman or Purusha is a true eternal self which consciously witnesses manifest reality, but is independent of it. It's not the creator of it. It is not the creator of it. It is independent of the Prakriti primal substance and all the impermanent objects that arise from the primal substance.
Question.
Yeah.
So if it's not the creator of everything that's witnessed, what is is everything that's witnessed not real, or what is the creator of everything that it witnesses?
Prakriti is the primal substance, and you know, where did that come from? It's not saying in Wikipedia.
They haven't told us yet.
They haven't told, yeah, I haven't found that one out yet. Maybe you have to look at Hinduism in general. You know, maybe it's
Well,
Brahman or something.
I always thought that Atman or like being yogi, witness consciousness is everything. I mean, it benefits how you experience life. So when you're in touch with the witness consciousness, you automatically are in touch with the one who's observing everything. And so you're not your emotions, you're not, there's nothing kind of external. But I always thought that it wasn't separate, that it was kind of inclusive.
This is just Samkhya.
That's
This is just Samkhya,
yeah.
which is a school of Hinduism.
Of Hindus,
Right.
got it.
So
Okay.
Samkhya is saying that it is separate.
It's separate.
Separate, independent.
And so it's kind of like, that's like God.
Look, you
In
just
a way.
have
But
to
it's not a
separate
creator.
that this one narrow school that existed at one time.
Yeah.
And you keep having to.
And what we're trying-
Shantideva was even going into this, as you pointed
Right.
out, because this was prevalent during his time.
What we are all trying to do.
So I can see why many teachers skip this chapter.
What we are trying to do, we all are trying to do, is to make Samkhya fit what we think we know.
You can see.
And we
this
just have to take this as it is,
Yeah.
as it's laid out,
As they laid it out.
as Samkhya lays it out
and
themselves.
Subsequently,
Yeah.
logically.
And logically is
Refuted.
being refuted by Shantideva.
The Prakriti word is a very common word we
Sure.
use in Nepali.
Mm.
It's basically a creation. So that's a very common word we use every day.
Yeah.
So when we say, when you guys say, oh God in English, we go, Prakriti ko khela means it's a play of the creation.
Of the
So
creation. Mhm.
just to give you what the Prakriti word
That's
means,
good.
it's the creation, universal creation that we use very commonly every day. Just like, oh God, we
It is
say-
so good to have you here.
Yes. That's the vision of Prakriti out,
Yeah.
because it looks like everything is centered on Prakriti. Prakriti is a common word for the universe creation.
Okay, and then, you're pointing out something as, growing up native speaking languages closer to Hinduism than
Sanskrit.
English is, Sanskrit. I think, for example, merit would be really highly susceptible to having studied yoga and Hindu philosophies in the West from Western teachers who are using Sanskrit originated words, meaning stuff that perhaps isn't quite aligned with, say, pure Hinduism. Try and as we do, even for example, the simple word attachment, we're trying to learn a very specific definition of attachment, but we keep trying to make it a positive thing. Once you've been studying in our lineage for long enough, you kind of get used to the reality of what attachment is saying. But initially we think, a mother should be attached to her children. We should have attachments to a clean environment, this and that. I mean, so we have to be extreme when we're studying through our intellectual minds. We are so vulnerable to misinterpretation, or even worse, we're overlaying our internal paradigm of everything we've learned before onto what Christopher's saying.
Yeah.
And we have humans have an extremely high propensity towards normalizing everything they hear, see, and come in contact with, which means they try to make it work and be true.
Mhm.
So it's very hard for us to study, listen to, and take on board something that we're meant to ultimately see its mistaken essence. So I mean, I know I'm harping on this, but having lived through many years with Geshe Drakpa of confusion and wasted time, because I was not alone. I know maybe I'm the most vocal admitting it, but everybody was like, oh, we're supposed to do this, oh, we're supposed to do that, oh, what is it? Is everything one mind? Is it this? Is it that? I mean, so it's very important to keep in mind what Christopher is doing is he's chosen to show us
Mhm.
the school that Shantideva is refuting.
Right.
Mhm.
And he's showing us, he's trying to show us the details of something that Shantideva then is going to commence with an argument of why they are mistaken.
Right.
So keep that in mind. It's like you're looking at the fantasy explanation first. Anyway,
Mhm, yeah.
I
Well,
can't. All
it's-
these points I made, you just are.
Yeah.
This is all so that we can,
And so you guys have the advantage of a
Yes,
taste of these
I
words.
really think so, because like I said, when I hear the word prakriti,
Yeah.
it just, we use that, a very common word, but I wanted to clarify to you through, you
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
my background, that prakriti is, this is what I,
Yeah.
like you told me, it's a home, you know,
yeah,
court
sure.
advantage.
right,
type.
right. You got a home court advantage.
Yeah, but
Yeah, but it's
I
creation.
would like to express that to say that it's a creation of the universe. That is a very common word we use every day. So that's what prakriti is. And what you just said, I'm taking it as a debatable concept, so it's good. That's
How
one of the,
about, are you familiar with Purusha?
there's a word called purush, which means male figure.
Oh,
But purusha, I'm not
Purusha is
sure.
big, like the big cosmic
Yeah,
consciousness, yeah.
Purusha means, yeah,
yeah,
but
okay.
there's a word called Purush, which
Yeah.
means male. And again, Atman, it's spelled Atman,
Yeah.
but we always say Atma.
Atma.
So the N is a silent word, but
Oh.
it's spelled Atma.
Atma.
So those are the things we have a home court advantage
Yeah.
of.
Oh, that's really great to have you here.
yeah.
That's interesting, yeah.
But this debate is good though, because in Buddhism we debate and try to eliminate what's confusing and keep
Basically,
going.
you know, what Shantideva is trying to teach us is the methodology for how to go about debating our own intellectually formed misunderstandings. They call them delusions, but by going through this process with him in debating the Shankyas, we need to be thinking, all right, what are our own intellectually formed delusions, and how is Shantideva going about? What is his method for getting to the facts? You know, and so that becomes our method for getting to the facts of our own intellectual delusions, because our intellectual delusions are what they call cognitive obscurations, and cognitive obscurations are what keep us from becoming enlightened. Ego self-grasping, the afflictive obscurations, are what keep us trapped in samsara. We get rid of those afflictive obscurations and we are liberated from samsara. But we are still not enlightened because of the cognitive obscurations. The cognitive obscurations will, when we get rid of those, then we can see exactly what the self actually is. But while we have these intellectually formed obscurations, we will not be able to get at what the self actually is. So this is Shantideva's methodology. He's showing us how to clear this up. So this is why it's important, why this debate is important for us, you know. Okay, so now here we go. So it's clear from the explanation of Shamkya that the Shamkyas postulate and accept an inherently existing self, and we're talking about Atman or Purusha here, that is conscious, knowing, permanent, self-existent, and independent. It is an example of a view of self that is speculatively conceived by the intellect. The refutation by Shantideva of this conceived self, his proof that such a supposedly permanent entity is a totally fictitious creation of the mind, is presented in the following debate. So now we get into the things we need to know about this debate. It's impossible, and this is coming from Geshe Drakpa, and when we studied the debate with him and Venerable Robina, Courtin, she talks about this all the time. So it's impossible for us to engage in any kind of meaningful debate or discussion or inquiry without clearly defining the terminology we're using. We have to understand what our vocabulary is, the definitions of the words. We all have to be clear about that and agree upon that Otherwise, our mind will not be clear. And you see, we have to be very precise with the definitions, with what these words are meaning. Because if we're not precise with what the words are meaning, our mind won't be precise in understanding what's going on. And our conclusion that we come to will not be a definite conclusion. It will not be precise. It will be sort of fuzzy. So now we're going to get into defining the terms that are going to be used in this particular debate that Shantideva is having with the Samkhyas. So these following terms are taken directly from the Samkhya explanation of what it is, what the Samkhya philosophy is. So the first is consciousness. And consciousness is, we're going to use conventional, in these cases, we're going to use conventional definitions, because the Samkhya is not actually defining consciousness, but it is sort of implying what the conventional definition is saying. Consciousness is conventionally defined as awareness. It's the subject-object-based awareness of our external and internal existence. It's just awareness of external and internal existence, consciousness. So, and it also, it refers to, we tend to think it's just, we're talking about the mind. No. It talks about the our ear consciousness, our eye consciousness, our nose consciousness, our touch consciousness. These are all consciousnesses. Beyond just being sensory organs, there's a consciousness that goes with them. There's a consciousness that sees shape and color. There's a consciousness that's actually hearing the sound. Now, the mental consciousness then decides what that sound is, but there's actually an ear consciousness that is just hearing sound, hearing frequency. So this is all part of what consciousness is. And so this is part of this debate. And this is good for us. It's good for us to hone our minds in this way, to become very precise in what these terms actually mean and what they're talking about. So the next is permanent. Oh my God, this is a big one. Permanent. We so misunderstand permanent. Well, let me give you the definition of permanent. Permanent is conventionally defined as being without any change. That's it. Permanent does not mean perpetual. Perpetual is impermanent. Permanent means it doesn't change. That's it. It's not about being eternal. It's not about being perpetual. But the actual definition of permanent is without any change. Okay. Independent. That's another one. Independent is conventionally defined, and here's the simplest definition, is not depending on anything. Not depending on anything. So this implies that something that is truly independent, a truly independent entity, does not depend on parts. It is self-existent, and it is solitary. It's unitary. It's not depending on anything else. So that's very important, to be very clear, very precise about what independent is referring to. Eternal is the next one. These are all coming from the Samkhyas. These are words they're using, or they're translated as these words. Eternal is conventionally defined as continuing perpetually. Continuing perpetually. That's it. In both ways. Backward, forward. Continuing perpetually. Eternal. It's definitely not permanent. It is not permanent. Pure, here's another one. Pure is conventionally defined as free of being mixed with something else. And that's kind of like the best definition I've heard, because we tend to superimpose all kinds of things onto pure. It's just free of being mixed with something else. Now here are the Samkhya definitions. The Samkhyas define Atman as the true self, an observing consciousness that is permanent, independent, eternal, and pure. So we just went through what all of those are. And that's what the Samkhyas are saying Atman is. And for the Samkhyas, this is also equivalent to the Sanskrit term Purusha.
Will you repeat that?
Yeah.
That true self is
The true self, an observing consciousness, that is permanent, independent, eternal, and pure. Already, if you're thinking very carefully, you're going to see the inconsistencies with this, what they say Atman is, and the definitions of these terms. But we don't normally do that. We just go, oh yeah, oh yeah. And it just washes over it. We kind of take it in and we start mixing it with all of our own kinds of beliefs. These activities, all of these activities, according to the Samkhyas, the objects of this self's awareness, the object of Atman's awareness, they are defined as the activities of mind, perception, and matter. So it covers everything that has to do with mind, perception, and matter. A lot of times, it will, like prakriti will just be maybe defined in terms of matter, but it's everything. It's like you're saying, it's all of creation: mind, perception, and matter. These activities are said to be impermanent, and they arise from prakriti, which is defined as the primal substance of the first cause. Shantideva uses all of these terms to form the basis of his reasoning in debating the Samkhya view of the self. So before we get into the actual debate, any discussion about this,
Well,
these terms?
I'm kind of relating that view a little bit to dependent arising. Because if everything, according to this view, Samkhya, everything that we see, everything that Atman perceives arises from the first cause. So it's arising from something. So it's
impermanent.
And it's impermanent.
Right, meaning that it changes. So they don't actually use the word dependent arising.
Yeah,
where the problem comes is that they say there's a first cause that is not a dependent arising.
Yeah.
So
It's like,
it's like, how can dependent arising come out of something that doesn't have dependent arising in its nature? Things begin to fall apart when you logically, I really precisely and logically analyze it. But when you don't, it just all sounds like, oh yeah, first cause.
It's subtle. It
is subtle to us. It's not subtle to somebody who's trained in debate.
yeah,
They
you know,
clearly
like,
see it.
you know, when you see one of those images that has like a hidden image in it, and then once you see it, you can't not see it.
Yeah.
It's like, it's gonna be like that.
Yeah.
Okay, that's all.
Right.
Okay. Maybe there was more.
No, it's gonna be like that. It's just,
Okay. Anything else?
I mean, yeah, I just wanna get on my soapbox again about language.
As you should. This is about language.
Yeah, and I just want to point out how we all are in our culture, especially if you're not trained in this kind of dialectic thinking. So we read headlines like stock market poised to reach new highs. The average normal person will think, oh wow, great, the stock market's gonna go to. We totally, and that headline was intentionally written by somebody who's trying to push the stock market higher. Poised is not a word saying what's happening. Poised means
It's way ready.
Poised, it could also crash the next day. Poised can mean whatever. So we have to, this is very, very, very important to us. And we see it all the time in the discussion now going on the internet with politics, religion, and business and corporate and geopolitical issues. If you read the headline and you see a word like poised or
Appears to.
Timbuktu may march upon Shambhala. Look at those words.
How they're using words.
They're using words like may, poise, considering. I mean,
Appears, yeah.
and you have to get very harsh and realistic with what's happening in our world is we are intentionally being manipulated through language by people who have a particular agenda, good or bad.
Even worse, we
Anyway.
unconsciously do this ourselves.
We do.
We do it with one
Well,
another
we do
even.
it all the time when we don't want to
Yeah.
commit.
Yeah.
Yeah, I might do that.
Yeah.
I might.
Yeah, and it's a way of kind of manipulating a
I
situation.
mean, it's so irritating what you have. I mean, what arises from this are movements that we all are concerned about, that we look around and, these cult figures who have big movements and whatever side of all these issues you're on, that's how this happens.
Mhm, mhm.
This
Yeah.
is also why,
Languages
this is also why I really encourage you to look at the movie Don't Look Up, because there's two very level-headed scientists saying, no, this is not gonna happen. We have the data, the trajectory is set, this is going to happen, and you can see the whole planet of society, the whole habituation towards normalizing. Oh, there's a probability, and then all these things arise around language. It's all done on the basis of language.
Yeah, so this is a big deal.
Add one more thing to that, and that is, I mean, language, what you're saying, language is everything. And when I first got into the healing arts years ago, the first one that really called to me and that I was called to, it was using, the premise of it was using language, spoken word to shift energy.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's prayer, it's, I mean, you can see that in everything, but when she was explaining what was happening, she said, really, the gist of this, like so many things, is using specific words to move energy.
Mhm.
And it's just like, wow, that's what we do all the time. And that's what we're doing in this study. And you're pointing out like I'm saying, these are subtle differences, but they are differences,
Mhm.
and so it's fascinating.
Yeah, I mean,
Well, to add to that, Merritt, words carry vibration.
Yeah.
Words are energy as well.
right.
And, it totally shifts the environment around us, depending on what word you choose to use and how you choose to communicate. You can use negatively spun or negatively charged words to change the energy in an environment to more of an under or lower vibrational energy. You can use more optimistic or positive spun terminology to raise the vibration energy of a certain situation. And that is why I think, it's been, I won't say drilled, lovingly shared to us repetitively, to pay attention to our mind, our words, and what we say to one another.
Mhm.
And ourselves.
And ourselves, most importantly to ourselves, because that's where the total shift comes from. Speaking positively and lovingly towards ourselves, then towards others, and so on and so forth. And then that positive vibrational energy shift happens then throughout. It's literally a wave of positive energy. We've experienced when really positive people walk into a room, the energy shifts, their energy comes in with them. And we've also experienced when someone who's down and low comes into a room and how their vibrational energy can shift the energy in the room. And so, it's our responsibility to be mindful of what we say and the words we use, and in communication, not only with ourselves, but the people around us and the world that we're interacting with.
Who I really love in this regard is Venerable Robina, when she's talking about the power of words and the state we're at when we're not precise enough with our words. She says, when you're in public, keep your lip zipped and your hands to yourself, and when you're by yourself, watch your mind. So I remembered that. So I sometimes just not saying something helps.
Yeah.
Just keeping your lips zipped. You don't have to let it out, you know?
Right, and we've all probably heard the adage, if you have nothing nice to say nothing at all, growing up.
Right.
It's the same
Right.
kind of thing. Keep your lips zipped unless you have something positive to say.
That
shut.
goes to your point, because it's energy. I mean, we'll still have that energy. It'll still be sort of exuding from us, but we don't make it worse by opening our mouth and then just creating this whole interaction, which can just completely snowball out of control.
Right.
In like these words of all these people that have passed it down either orally or written, to understand the precision of the words,
Mhm.
to actually shift our.
Right.
I mean, that's like the vehicle.
Yeah, and this is
vehicle.
Shantideva's purpose. This is the purpose of Buddhism, being so precise with language, so that we can actually cut through all the doo-doo about it, the deluded, intellectual deluded views is what we're talking about here, and get to the facts,
Right.
So here we go with the first stanza of this, section. Without all of this background information, it's hard to even know what's going on when you're just reading. If you're just reading the stanzas, which is why.
What's the number of stanza, Christopher?
60, stanza 60.
Thank you.
So this is all in reference. This is all a refutation of the permanent self set forth by the Samkhyas. So here's stanza 60. If the hearing consciousness, remember hearing consciousness, is permanent, they say consciousness is permanent, it follows that it's hearing all the time. Remember, permanent means unchanging. If the hearing consciousness is permanent, it follows that the hearing consciousness is hearing all the time. That's just logic. But that's not what we do. All right. And if there is no object, then, if there is no sound for that permanent hearing consciousness, what does it cognize? On what grounds do you, the Samkhyas, call it a consciousness? So, if the conscious self that hears and cognizes sound is permanent and therefore unchangeable, then whether or not there is any sound present, the unchangeable conscious self will always be hearing sound. But how is it possible for such a consciousness to do so when no sound is present? On what grounds can this be called a consciousness? This is Shantideva asking the Samkhyas. So the Samkhyas reply, and no, this is still Shantideva. This is stanza 61. So Shantideva is saying, he's sort of following this through. He's saying, if something that's unconscious knows, yeah, because what they're saying that it would have to be unconscious to not hear the sound. So if something that's unconscious knows, it follows that a stick has knowledge also. Therefore, in the absence of a thing to know, it's clear that consciousness will not arise. So here's what they're saying. If a subjective consciousness, such as your consciousness, could actually exist without having an object of consciousness, if there was a consciousness that could exist without having an object of consciousness, and if you remember last week, Kavita said, His Holiness the Dalai Lama said, consciousness is subjective. That's what consciousness is. Consciousness is awareness, and awareness has to be aware of something. There has to be an object for that subject of awareness to be conscious of. So here's this question then. If a subjective consciousness could actually exist without having an object of consciousness to be aware of, then the absurd conclusion would be that a stick could also be a subjective consciousness, since it doesn't perceive objects. This is where the logic will take it.
That's Shantideva.
It's not just Shantideva, it's all of our teachers who are Geshe Drakpa. Geshe Drakpa was a debate master. I mean, he was, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, His Holiness would pull him in for
that's
special debates that they wanted to have.
That's how we got pulled from Draco.
Yeah. So and Geshe Drakpa tried to teach us these things, but we were so not pure. We are so mixed
I
with,
cried in class because I could see how foggy everybody's thinking is.
Yes.
And it was very heartbreaking because that's our problem.
this is an essential point, and it goes to, when I was talking about afflictive obscurations, and they say the afflictive obscurations are harder than these, I'm sorry, the cognitive obscurations. The cognitive obscurations are more difficult for us to get than the afflicted ones. We all understand the afflictive obscuration. We understand our ego. We understand that we get upset, blah, 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 blah. But this fogginess of our cognitive powers is what actually prevents us from realizing the omniscience of enlightenment.
I'm gonna, again, cognitive obscurations are not necessarily related to your intelligence.
No, they're
Because you can know let's say you are a master of biology.
This is a great point.
And you know incredible depth of knowledge about the various species and genuses, and I mean incredible depth of knowledge and how it all works. But it is not the same as having the clarity, because in fact, and we know this sort of intuitively, in fact, it can happen, it does happen all the time in our world in sciences, that scientists become so expert in what they know that they can't see what they don't know, if that makes any sense.
difficult to see outside the box that they have.
And
Yeah.
even this is it's kind of painful and heartbreaking.
It's true for all of us.
Anyway,
Yeah.
I just
Yeah.
I don't know why that just came to mind in this conversation.
It's true for all of us, and I
Because
believe,
we misno, in other words.
yeah, and this
We
kind
do the
of
wrong things.
this kind of precision in our thinking is required.
And it's not about IQ.
It's not
or
about
your
IQ.
power to understand cellular
IQ
biology.
helps, but it's not, it's not about IQ. Yeah, I mean, this precision in our thinking is part of the whole wisdom wing that they're talking about. When you've got this compassion wing, may sentient beings not suffer, may they be happy, but it has no power. It has no power unless we can clear up, our mind. This is all part of the wisdom wing, to become very, very precise, and logical in our thinking. Yeah, so this is what this is about. So he's saying, if consciousness doesn't have an object, then, if you're saying it can exist without an object, well, a stick can exist without an object. What are you saying, Samkhyas? So the Samkhya response to this is, consciousness that apprehends sound is permanent. Consciousness that apprehends sound is permanent. Remember, all consciousness, according to the Samkhyas, is permanent. It doesn't change. When there is no sound present, then it apprehends visual forms and other kinds of objects. So although there's no sound, it still has an object of consciousness, in this case, visual forms. Of course, you and I all know from our own experience that we can hear things, see things, smell things, taste things, touch things all simultaneously. It's not like we're, a sound has to go away for us to be aware of something visual. But this is what the Samkhyas are saying, because they're getting sort of locked into their view. All right, here's stanza 62. And this is Shantideva again speaking, asking them, talking to them. If the self-same consciousness detects a form at that time, why does it not hear? Perhaps you say the sound's no longer there, then neither is there the consciousness of sound, which is supposedly permanent. So the Samkhyas don't consider this to be a problem. They say that the permanent consciousness, which perceived sound earlier on, can perfectly well perceive something else like a shape at a later time. Consciousness is permanent. It doesn't change. There is simply a difference of focus on the individual objects of awareness. But Shantideva says, if the permanent consciousness that was perceiving sound before doesn't change, how could it be that when it later perceives a form or something else, it still is not perceiving sound? I mean, this is so obvious to us. It's like, how can the Samkhya be saying this? Because our own experience shows that this isn't the case. When the Samkhyas reply, that's because the sound is no longer there, Shantideva responds as before. If the object is absent, the permanent consciousness of the object is absent as well. Stanza 63. How are y'all doing? Is this making sense in some kind of the context we're talking about?
Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
yeah, I mean, I think
Yeah.
the point here is you're trying to illuminate how to do this type of
Yeah.
debate with.
I will honestly tell you, the first time I read this, I didn't know what it was saying. It's like, oh no, can I skip this? It just seemed to be going around in circles. All right. Shantideva says in stanza 63, how could that which has the nature of a sound perceiver, sort of like an ear consciousness, be transformed into a form perceiver, an eye consciousness, if consciousness is permanent? And so Samkhya says a single man can be both son and father. That's the, that's the example they're giving, and we know that's true. A person, a man can be somebody's father and somebody's son at the same time. But Shantideva says, but these are merely names. That's not the person's nature is not that. The person's nature is not that. If a consciousness was really permanent, actually permanent, it could never be subject to any change. The definition of permanent, unchanging. It would never be possible for an unchanging consciousness that perceives sound to change into an unchanging consciousness that perceives form. It's not logical.
Could it just be perceiving? We're putting the labels on sound, taste, sight. What if it's just perceiving?
Merit, you're going into trying to make Sankhyas.
Well, but I'm going, well,
But the thing, but what they're saying, here again, you have to take, they're saying that perceiving consciousness, awareness is permanent.
Right.
It doesn't change.
Based on the definitions Christopher just went over with us, permanent means doesn't change. Yeah.
So it's just crazy because it requires the changing. A consciousness is affected by the things that are out there, and it changes according to. So this is our experience of it, and yet they're saying it's permanent. It doesn't change. So Shantideva is just like going to town on this one.
But yes,
Yeah.
it can just perceive it, but it requires that it keep up with the plot to.
but I mean,
continually
the
perceive what's
foundation of it, here's the argument, the foundation of it is always in a mode of perceiving.
Yeah, but
The
that's.
levels of it that they say is changes, whether it's sound or sight,
Right.
or whatever, but the fundamental permanence of it is constantly perceiving.
You're getting ahead of the argument. You're good. It's good. Because it finally ultimately winds up it takes you to a place that goes to nihilism. Ultimately. But let's
Anyway.
not go there yet. All right. So this whole idea that
Because we're getting off the.
it would never be possible for an unchanging consciousness that perceives sound to change into an unchanging consciousness that perceives form. The two are essentially different. This goes against the Samkhya idea that consciousness is both permanent and independent. Doesn't depend on anything. Remember the definition of independent. And they're saying consciousness is not just permanent, it's independent. Okay, then the Samkhyas then say, well, however, that just as one particular man can be both a father and a son at the same time, objects of a permanent consciousness, such as sound and form, do not exclude each other. Since all objects of a permanent consciousness arise from the permanent primal substance, prakriti, they are considered to be aspects of the primal substance's nature, which is impermanent. Therefore, form by nature, but this is not where, I mean, where they go with this is taking it to what you just said to its extreme. Thereby, form by nature is the same as sound, for their nature is derived from the same primal substance. Thus, when form is perceived, even though there is no perception of sound, nevertheless, there is the perception of the nature of sound. According to the Samkhyas, this avoids the unwanted consequence that the consciousness perceiving sound is impermanent, because consciousness is permanent, right? According to them. Shantideva says, the example the Samkhyas give is invalid. When one says that a man can be both father and son, one is merely attaching labels to him on the basis of two distinct relationships. He cannot in any absolute sense and by nature be both father and son. If by nature he is a truly existing father, it would be impossible for him to ever assume the position of being a son, since in that particular case, fathership precedes sonship. You're seeing the level of precision that Shantideva is going to cut through this sort of foggy, cloudy way we sometimes talk about things. It seems ridiculous, but if you follow the precision, he's being logical. On the other hand, if by nature this man truly exists as a son, it is impossible for him to become a father, because it is impossible for the truly existing state of sonship to precede a later state of Buddhahood. What he's basically arguing for is that things are impermanent. They're not truly self-existent. Go back to what the Buddha said. Any self that's perceived by the mind as if it exists independently is not a self at all. This whole matter is simply one of labeling, Shantideva says. And as such, Shantideva says he has no intention of refuting it. And in any case, it doesn't prove what the Samkhyas are trying to prove. All right, so we go to stanza 64. And Shantideva continues. He says, likewise, pain, neutrality, and pleasure are neither fatherhood nor sonship, and we indeed have never yet observed a consciousness of form perceiving sound. All right, so what does he mean by this pain, neutrality, pleasure? And I'm sure you've heard of, when we talk about this, you'll know what we're referring to, because you've studied yoga. If the man is simultaneously both father and son in an absolute sense, then these attributes, according to the way the Samkhyas talk, these attributes must exist in the prakriti, the primal substance of the first cause. This primal substance has three attributes. In Sanskrit, they're called gunas. And I looked at all the gunas. These attributes can be lots of different things. So I just boiled it down. I mean, Wulstan Fletcher translated them as pain, neutrality, and pleasure. And I decided I'm going to go even more neutral than that. And I'm just going to, because they have these different characteristics. So the primal substance has three attributes: action, inaction, and balance. And all these other things, pain, pleasure, neutrality, all kinds of things arise from the action, inaction, and the balance. It's called Rajas, Tamas, and Sattva. The Samkhyas do not accept any attribute other than these three primary qualities of the primordial prakriti substance. These form the nature of all manifest phenomena, such as sounds, visual forms, so forth, egos, all of that. All of it comes from these three gunas, these three energies. all of the manifestations are said to be of one nature, since they are all of the nature of Prakriti, the primal substance from which they have originated. So then we take this to its logical conclusion. Thus, for the Samkhyas, father and son, fire and water, a pillar and a pig, a napkin and a rain cloud, all become of one nature. In this way, they can say that two unrelated and distinct entities can be of one nature. If this is so, then the six sense consciousnesses, eye, ear, nose, taste, tongue, feeling, and consciousness, tactile consciousness, all of the six sense consciousness, they're all the same. They're all of the same nature. But who has ever experienced this? Shanti said, who has ever experienced this? Who has ever smelled their thoughts? Who has ever kissed a sound? Who has ever heard a flavor? When has a consciousness that perceives form ever perceived sound? Who has ever seen an oink? I mean, our own experience tells us this, you know? I mean,
Christopher,
yeah.
I think there are people, they're called super sensors in today's vernacular, who actually, for example, when they listen to music, see colors.
Yeah, they're
Or,
seeing energy.
well, I don't know if it's energy. I mean, they can describe seeing something, hearing something, sorry. So the ear consciousness is translated into a kind of visual consciousness. So, and there are these people called synesthesias where they can have multiple senses that overlap and sense what would be thought of as a primary being sensed by one consciousness, but then also is sensed by other consciousness. Not sure how this
Yes.
works.
That's perfectly fine, because it's not as if the ear consciousness is seeing the colors. The seeing the colors would probably be something like the mental consciousness and internal, but it's not the ear consciousness. We do this all the time. We watch a movie, we hear the music, we see the pictures, we listen to the words, we cognize what the words mean. All of our consciousnesses are functioning all at the same time. But we have never smelled a sound. You know, we may hear a sound and it somehow reminds us of sometime we smelled something like that, and the sense of the smell will arise in our mind, but we're not actually smelling it with the nose consciousness. You know, we relate things, but what the Samkhya's are saying is that they're actually all of the same nature. It's all the same nature. This is where the Samkhya's are going with it. What you're saying is perfectly fits in with things are not permanent, things are interdependent. You know, they're not independent, they're interdependent, they are changeable, they are constantly perpetual, they're moving. So what the example you give is not the way what the Samkhya's are referring to. And it's not what Shantideva is refuting. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, okay, thank you.
All right. So if the Samkhya assertion was true, that all of these things, all of these sense consciousness, they're of the same nature. So they're basically interchangeable, you might say. Shantideva says this should be evident. If that's true, it should be evident. But that has never been witnessed by a valid mind, a valid consciousness. A valid ear consciousness has actually never smelled anything. Or, you know, seen
Okay,
and
you get your
oink,
point.
all right? So you get the point. All right. All right, the Samkhya's respond in stanza 65. But like an actor, the consciousness takes a different role and then sees. Shantideva says, if so, this consciousness is not a constant thing. It's not permanent. And if its later mode is still the first, he said, that's some kind of identity that's never been seen before. So the Samkhya replies that even though no one has ever had the experience of their eye consciousness seeing sound or their ear consciousness hearing form, the nature of both consciousnesses is nevertheless one and the same. They say it's just like an actor who dresses in the costume of a god in the morning and as a demon in the afternoon. Similarly, the earlier consciousness of sound appears later in the aspect of consciousness of form, and then it can see. But this would mean that the previous consciousness of sound, which is permanent according to the Samkhyas, is impermanent because the earlier aspect is gone and another one is assumed. If consciousness assumes a new aspect which is different from the first, but is still considered to be one with it and not different, even though it appears to be quite different, then, as Shantideva says, this is a kind of entity unknown anywhere in the world and is something that has never been seen before. Shantideva is pointing out that to say that something is one and identical when it can clearly be seen as belonging to two different categories is contradictory and it doesn't make sense. And what he's also pointing out is the level of precise logic that we have to develop for ourselves if we're going to go all the way on this path of the Bodhisattva. It's not just about love and compassion. Love and compassion is essential. It's the reason, actually. It's the reason for the Bodhisattva path. But without this precise reasoning and logic that's part of the wisdom wing, we'll never be able to accomplish it. So even though it seems outrageously precise, and you're going, it's important. It's what we sort of need to habituate ourselves to kind of thinking this way. This is the whole reason Geshe Drakpa was trying to teach us to debate, and the whole reason Kavita sat there crying, because none of us could even follow or grasp what he was trying to say, you know. All right, so we're just about there.
I was crying about the pervasive
ignorance that we all have, right. All right, stanza 66. Samkhya then comes back and says, but the consciousness's different modes are quite unreal. Shantideva says, its essence, therefore, you better describe it to me. You better tell me what this is. You say that it's just simply knowing. It follows that all beings are a single thing. So here's what it is saying. The Samkhyas say that the particular aspects, say, of an eye consciousness perceiving sound and an ear consciousness perceiving shape and form are in fact just modes of consciousness that are not actually real or true. This is the Samkhya. Their nature is one, true, and permanent. But Shantideva responds that if their particular aspects are untrue, then what reason is there for saying that their nature is true? The Samkhyas say that their nature is true and the same in the sense that the eye consciousness and the ear consciousness are both merely conscious perceivers. It's similar to what you said earlier, right?
Yeah, it's kind of stuck.
Shantideva then responds by saying, in that case, it would follow that all sentient beings are one and the same because they are all the same in being merely conscious perceivers. Stanza 67. This is Shantideva talking. What has mind and what does not have mind would thus become identical, for both are equal in existing. If the different kinds of mind are all unreal, what common basis can there be for them? Shantideva goes on to say that if one continues to follow this same line of reasoning being used by the Samkhyas in their arguments, not only would all sentient beings be one and the same, because they are all the same in being merely conscious perceivers, but the entirety of animate and inanimate phenomena would be one and the same, because they are all equal by virtue of merely existing. If they're all equal because they're conscious, perceivers, well, then if you follow that logic, then everything that exists is all equal because it exists, because of its existence. This is the logic that he's taking it to. If one takes that line of reasoning to its ultimate level, one would be forced to come to the conclusion that there are no differences at all among all existing phenomena. The activities of mind, perception, and matter, which is the prakriti, the primal substance, what evolves from the primal substance itself from which they arise, and the true eternal self, the Purusha, the Atman, they would all be one and the same. Once one has totally discounted all the specifics of experience, what then remains of this mere consciousness, which is supposedly real, solitary, universal, and permanent? There is nothing left of it. And that's the end of that particular debate. So it's we can't be fuzzy in our logic. And we want to be, like Kavita was saying, we want to sort of normalize everything. We want to see how it fits in. We want to basically be agreeable, and so sort of take it all in and make it all work, like it's all one. But what we have to remember is that we are living in a deluded kind of existence based on ego self-grasping, based on these afflictive emotions, and we can get out of that by seeing that the ego is actually is selfless. It doesn't exist the way we think it does. But we still can't get all the way to enlightenment unless we can clear up our cognitive obscurations. So it requires that we become very precise in how we think, and that's just going to take some time. I mean, if you go back and read this, I mean, this is all going to be posted. You can read it over and over and over again, and finally you'll go, "Oh yeah, that's what he's saying is right. It's actually logical. It makes sense." But the first time you hear it, I'm not so sure.
I think you pointed this out, that our experience of seeing how this type of debate works is, in a way, the most important
That's
piece.
why. Mm-hmm.
And I know you said that, but I'm just repeating that the value of this in the Shantideva is to show us that we need to have this type of debate with what is presented to us by our own mistaken our own mistaken paradigms, as well as the ones continuously being thrust at us.
He's giving us an example of the methodology that they use for debate. When you see the monks doing all this, this is the kind of thing they're doing. One side is presenting, their view, and then the other side is saying no, but, and they get them to a point. They get the what's the person who's being debated? There's I don't know what they're called. I mean, they're words. The victim, yeah, the one who's sitting down and the one who's going.
But it's all done through this. Well, if that's true, then this must be
Right.
true.
It's all up due to
If
consequential
this,
logic.
Yeah.
This is why prasangika. No, yeah, prasangika means consequence. It's consequential logic that they're talking about. If this is so, then that must be so. If you're going to say that all conscious perceivers, all sentient beings are one and the same because all conscious perceivers are of the same nature, then you would have to say, well, anything that exists must be one and the same because they all exist. It's a consequential kind of logic, which is actually infallible if you don't get fuzzy about it. And we are fuzzy.
Yeah,
We
and
are fuzzy.
you also have to be, well,
Yeah.
we'll leave it there.
Yeah, we'll leave it. So, man, we covered it. All right, we're done. Okay. thank you, everybody. We'll say a closing prayer and then we'll get right to Tibetan class here. All right, let's do let's do the final dedication and let's say it in English. It's on the very last page. In all my lives, may I not be separated from true lamas, and so enjoy the splendor of Dharma, fully perfecting the virtues of levels and paths. May I speedily attain the state of Vajradhara. Bye.
Thank you, Christopher.
Got through the subjects. I thought I would never do this. Okay.
Good job, Christopher.
Thank you. All right. And I'll stop this recording and then
Start the